Dort for the win. It's good! Pokuševski takes flight as SGA plays through the contact, banks it in on the foul.
What is up, Thunder fans? Welcome to the Uncontested Post-Game Podcast Edition. We are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and the official podcast of SI Thunder. You guys are joined again. This is, I think, 3 straight Mondays, which is kind of weird. Not planned, just kind of how it worked out. But by none other than Taylor Peterson. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_P15. And unfortunately, unlike the other past 2 Mondays, not nearly as fun of a game to break down with you all and cover tonight. However, still a lot to take from this. We're still going to have some fun with it. So we appreciate all of you tuning in. Before I get going, be sure to go and leave us a 5-star review or rating. Take a screenshot, send it to us on our any of our social media pages. Send it to any of us individually, and we will shoot you over some of our cool holographic uncontested stickers. I have one of mine actually full soccer mom style on the back of my car right now, back of my Jeep. And I got to be completely honest, it looks pretty awesome. I was admiring it over the weekend. We were doing some traveling for Thanksgiving, and it just kind of stood out to me. And I thought it looked really nice. So I thought I'd plug those and be sure to let you guys know that those are still available if you are interested. Now let's go ahead and jump into it. On a day and a weekend where many Thunder fans, specifically those like myself, like my co-host Justin, like my co-host Kamiar, my co-host JG Silva, my co-host Jacob, I guess all of our co-hosts except Nick Crane, who also happen to be Sooner fans as well. At least for myself, I was hoping, kind of looking forward to a Thunder game, to be honest, kind of get my mind off everything for a while. Obviously today being Monday, the 29th, Lincoln Riley had his introductory press conference with USC. The Sooners, Bob Stoops, and both the Joes had their press conference as well. Media availability. Love Bob Stoops. Love that man. But regardless, I was kind of looking forward to a Thunder game to kind of jump back into some basketball, get my mind off some football. And unfortunately, the Thunder play a rather forgettable and rough game against the Rockets, losing 102-89. Didn't really help get our mind off football very easily. It was a bit of a tough one in Houston. And it was kind of strange because the Thunder, I would say, played their worst since really that game early on the season when they played in Houston. Again, actually, that was the night that Jacob and I hosted our live watch party that we had at Prairie Brew Pub, or Prairie Ale House. And unfortunately, the Thunder played just about the same, although the result maybe was a little better. Just not great at all. I would argue maybe their worst half of basketball, the first half. And we'll go ahead and jump into that. But Thunder made a couple of runs late in the second half, made it a little better. Again, that score is a little closer than the first time the Thunder met with Houston, in Houston, like I mentioned. But ultimately, they couldn't really get past that 12 to 14 point mark. This might be more of a quicker post game than what you all might be used from me in the past. But I think like I said, I think there's still some things to take away from this game and some things to break down. So before we do that, just a couple of notes from before the game that I think are interesting and worth pointing out. The Thunder were without 3, honestly, pretty important players when it comes to their rotation. Obviously, there's a little bit of a disclaimer there just due to the kind of season that the Thunder are playing this year. But no Derek Favors due to a non-COVID illness. Thankfully, it's not COVID related, it appears, but he was out with a bit of an illness. No Kinrich after, I guess it was Friday night's game. He turned his ankle in that Wizards game, and Daignault said in his his pregame availability that Kinrich will be out probably at least this week, which makes sense. And but I would, if I had to guess, Shays didn't seem that serious, and he was out for 2-3 games, and Kinrich is looking a little more serious. So I would assume that Kinrich Kinrich's absence might stretch into more of next week as well, unfortunately. And then Mike Muscala, he was actually a late game scratch, so late that the Thunder PR Twitter account, actually tweeted out shortly after tip-off. And this was due to some right ankle soreness from Muskie. Obviously, I think Muscala is probably okay. That's just not something they probably wanted to make him play through when they didn't really need to. Houston was also without one important player, Jalen Green. Obviously, their second overall first round draft pick, who's battling a hamstring issue. Ironically enough, with the Rockets win tonight, they've now won 3 straight, and that includes with Jalen Green going down early in the first of those 3 games. I just kind of find that interesting. Obviously, long term, the Rockets are better with Jalen Green in the lineup, but it is weird that they, go on like their one and only win streak of the season with Jalen Green being down. Something else mentioned, and this came up during the game. Daignault mentioned pregame that Paul Watson Jr. would get some burn tonight, coming into play with the starters early and getting some minutes off the bench, and that absolutely happened. And he also said that Roby would be back in the rotation. This was an interesting stat by the Oklahomans' Joe Masato. He mentioned that Watson, with those 3 players I mentioned earlier being out, Watson was the Thunder's oldest player available to play tonight at age 26. The Thunder just playing an incredibly young team right now, and it's crazy to think that Watson, a year and a half younger than I am, was the oldest player available for the Thunder tonight. And then just a little fun aside from the Thunder broadcast that came up there. Actually, it was in the first quarter or shortly into the game. This just kind of, unfortunately, Lou didn't have the best game tonight. But if you all have listened to our group podcast, especially with me on there, talking a lot about Lou Dort, or any of my post games, I've been talking a lot about Lou, how well he's been playing. We actually talked a lot about Lou on Sunday night's podcast, our group podcast that we did, how well he's been playing, especially in Shea's absence last week. But he's really been getting off to hot starts, and his first quarters have been terrific. Kind of like Shea's third quarters prior to his injury here last week had been so good. So here's a fun stat from the broadcast: 7.3 points per I guess quarter in the first, or 7.3 points being averaged in the first quarter for Lou, which is 7th in the NBA. He's shooting or averaging those 7.3 points on basically 52% from the floor in the first quarter, and he's 14 of 32 from 3 in the first quarter, which is tied for the second most made. Obviously, this is with the disclaimer of 7 games played since November 10th, but regardless, Lou had been tearing up in the first quarter, and he got off to a better start tonight. He played better in the first quarter, and then it just really went downhill from there. Unfortunately, hit a quick 3, which has become kind of something we're kind of becoming accustomed to, and had a couple nice layups, but unfortunately, it did not carry over into the rest of the quarters, rest of the game. So let's just go ahead and break down, I guess, do a quick recap of these 4 quarters. Again, not a ton to take from these before we get into some of our overall themes, but I like to do this just because there's some things that I can kind of mention in here that maybe won't come up when I'm going through some of the themes of the game, especially for those of you unable to watch or just wanting a quick little recap. So, like I said, the first quarter, SGA actually had it going early, which is driving to the rim at ease. He realized nobody could stop him on Houston. I actually tweeted out like it was really nice to see Shea do this, and if he continues to be aggressive, it should be a high-scoring game for him. And unfortunately, he did continue to be aggressive, but really struggled around the rim, continued to struggle like we've been seeing from Shea recently, which is really strange. We'll dive into that some. But OKC could just not stop Houston, even when Shea was scoring well from the very beginning. I think the prime example here, 7 second chance points for Houston to start off the game. I think this was at the point in the game. I don't know the time stamp, but I feel like this was when Houston had 12 points total, and I think 7 of those were those second chance points, which is just, again, kind of a lack of effort, and that seemed to carry over into the entirety of the game, not just the first quarter, unfortunately. Now, I mentioned Paul Watson Jr. and Roby. Those two, as well as Trey Mann, all came in together as the first 3 subs for OKC in the first quarter, and that also continued into the second half as well in the third quarter, which was cool. It was great to see Paul Watson Jr. get some burn, and I think maybe just a quick aside on Paul Watson Jr., just a perfect example of what the Thunder are doing this season, right? Trying to kind of set some baselines and see what they have in guys. Paul Watson Jr. essentially until the end of the game when Daignault was trying to be a little more competitive there and see if he could make a little bit of a run. Paul Watson Jr. was getting those Aaron Aaron Wiggins minutes that Wiggins has been getting over the past week, 2 weeks, which is fine, I think, for a game tonight, like against the Rockets, who weren't playing their best player. It made sense to give guys like that and Roby some burn. And unfortunately, Watson didn't do a ton with it, which isn't really surprising. That's also a lot to ask, just to throw him in there for one game and see what happens kind of thing. But just something I thought was interesting. I think a smart decision on the coaching staff's behalf. Obviously, I think they were hoping that the rest of the team would play better, which would help Watson Jr. there in some of those minutes. But it just kind of continues to show you the development, the long-term plan of this franchise. Again, sending players back and forth between the Blue and the Thunder, giving a player like Paul Watson Jr. some burn this season. And, we'll get into this some, but maybe a reason that we are seeing Bazley continue to play and be put in situations that he's being put in where he just is not playing well at all. So yeah, Thunder shoot only 1 of 9 from 3 in the first quarter. That's going to be a theme. You will see. Second quarter, not a ton to take away from here. Thunder only scored 14 points in the entire quarter, resulting in the lowest scoring half of OKC's season with 37 points total. I meant to do a little research before I jumped on here and see, because I know OKC's offensive rating is terrible. I want to say it's 29th, only in front of Houston. That's just off the top of my head, and that also could have changed since I saw that last week. But assuming they still are in, let's say, the bottom 5 of the league, for them to be held to their lowest scoring game against the Houston Rockets, the lowest scoring half against the Houston Rockets, quite frankly, I mean, whether we care all that much about winning or losing these games or not, it's pretty unacceptable from a team that we've grown accustomed to, high effort, team basketball, playing a solid brand of basketball, if I could talk. I don't know. That was pretty disappointing to see. And I thought that Daigneault would be pretty upset about that and might kind of light into these guys at halftime and try to get them fired up to come back out with just some more effort and motivation. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen. The Rockets gave the Thunder all sorts of opportunities to come back in that second quarter. The Thunder couldn't even really take advantage of it. Couldn't get anything to fall. They shoot only 2 of 21 from 3 at half, and we're still only down 9 points. Third quarter, Rockets starting hitting threes. Again, they didn't shoot great from 3, as you all will see, but they started to get some to fall at the right time, all while they were running in transition and creating opportunities for their offense, which, quite frankly, the Thunder were not. The Thunder couldn't get anything to fall at all, and that really was kind of led by Lou and Shea there, both really trying to get something going early in the third. I mean, Lou was just he was looking like the Lou that we saw 2 seasons ago on offense, where he had one wide open 3-point shot after he had missed already a wide open 3-point shot in the third quarter, as well as some shots down low. He was wide open for 3 on the right side of the court on the right wing, and just completely almost airballs a 3. It barely hits the far side of the rim. It was just ridiculous. He was in his own head, and it wasn't great. The bench comes in, led by Trey Man and Roby, who honestly were huge. Maybe the only 2 positives from this game, and they kind of helped get a bit of a comeback, or at least made the lead a little more manageable heading into the fourth quarter. But towards the end of the third quarter, SGA comes back in, playing alongside Trey Man and Roby, and he kind of helped ignite the Thunder, ignite a little run from the Thunder. The Thunder go an 11-3 run to end the quarter. They trailed only 72-60 heading into the fourth, which, trust me, was a lot better than heading into the fourth quarter. So the fourth quarter happens. This is the crazy stat. With 9 minutes, 11 seconds left in the game, the Thunder and Rockets combined to be 19 of 76 from 3. Again, I said the Rockets got quote-unquote hot from 3 there to start the third quarter, but it wasn't very hot, because with only 9 minutes left in the game, both teams were only 19 of 76 from the 3-point line. Just a grind of a basketball game, and not the most fun one to watch and cover. There were some weird lineups that were played in the third. For example, Ty Jerome, Teo finally got some minutes for the first time in a while. Trey Man, Wiggins, Roby was a lineup, but it worked to a degree. They were able to keep it fairly close. They played some decent enough defense against a Rockets bench unit as well. They generated some offense. A lot of that was led by Ty Jerome. He had a quick spark of about 5 points there, I believe, in the third quarter. And they kind of managed that 12-point. They kind of really overcome that 10, 12-point lead that the Rockets had, but they kept it manageable. And so Daigneault, rather than, just deciding to throw out, keep those kind of players in and the bench players in, get some of these other guys some burn, he decided to go ahead and bring back in the starters, minus Bazley, which is notable. Then Mark quickly subbed back in Trey Mann and Roby to play alongside Shea, Dort, and Lou, kind of to see, because obviously those are the 5 best players, I think, for from tonight. And he was hoping that group could kind of go on a run. And now they had gotten it back down to about 12 or 10 points. But unfortunately, they couldn't make a run. They continue to miss shots, and just, really the main theme of this game. So Dagnall puts back in the young guys, the bench guys to end the game, and that was pretty much that. About 3 minutes left. So again, I don't want to sound so negative, but it just wasn't the best game for the Thunder. It wasn't the best game from either side, and that was just kind of a quick little breakdown. So we'll go ahead and dive into some themes here. Again, you all that have listened to any of my solo post games, sometimes I like to switch it up. But I just, again, tonight, with so little content really to go through, I just decided to do what I do best and break down the negatives and the positives. We'll always end on the positives. And believe it or not, there are 2 pretty fun ones that we'll spend the most time on and that we'll end this post-game podcast on. But unfortunately, there's quite a few negatives. And even the ones I have listed here probably aren't all of them. But some are maybe worth talking about more than others. So we'll just kind of go through them. I'm curious to get your all thoughts. So please, if you guys are in the chat, continue to drop comments and questions. If you have other topics you want me to cover, be sure to drop them in there, and I will get to those at the end of the podcast. I also have 1 or 2 Twitter questions and some comments from Twitter that I'll mention as well, to add a little something to the end of this. So the negatives. I think the first one isn't really specific to one player. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, again, against this Houston Rockets team, was the only starter to score in double digits with, I believe, 22 points. I don't have the box. There it is, the box score. Yeah, 22 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. Shai, the only starter. The second highest scoring starter was none other than Lou Dort with 7 points. He was 3 of 10 from the field, 1 of 6 from 3. Again, that unfortunately ends Lou's long streak. I want to say, this is off the top of my head, because I feel like last week when I podcasted, it was 10 straight games, or maybe it was 8, and now it's 10. I don't know. Regardless, he was in double-digit games, scoring 2 or more three-pointers, or making 2 or more three-pointers in a game. Fortunately, that streak comes to an end tonight, as Lou struggled just about as much as anyone scoring. But again, with Shai being the only starter in double digits, that's a huge issue against this Houston Rockets team. I'm not necessarily sure, especially after everything we've seen throughout the season, that this is like a long-term concern necessarily, especially with the way that this team is constructed. But it's a little frustrating for me, I think, covering this game, seeing the way that the brand of basketball that we keep harping on, that the Thunder are playing, what this team is trying to do. And we keep comparing it to that of the Houston Rockets, right? Where, they aren't playing John Wall, even though John Wall wants to play. And, well, that's so different to what the Thunder are doing. And the Thunder come out just with little effort and only have one starter that scores in double digits. That's a little frustrating for me as a fan who's been defending this rebuild, comparing it to that of the Houston Rockets, right? And I still stand by all that we've said. I'm just a little disappointed in this team and their performance, and I think that first negative really kind of encapsulates all of that. SGA and Lou are my next negative, kind of a perfect transition into that one. Like I said, Shai, so 22 points, that's better. But 9 and 20 from the floor. A little more efficient, I think, than I realized when until I was looking at the box score prior to me starting the podcast. But again, like I said, Shai should have had, if he really wanted to. And I get him playing in the flow of the offense and trying to set up teammates and all of that. But look, he was trying to get his own. He knew that the team needed it, and he still wasn't able to. And that's an issue. We keep talking about teams packing the paint, but you saw that oftentimes, particularly in the second half, when Shai, Lou, Giddey are trying to drive to the rim, and you have 3, sometimes 4 Houston Rockets defenders packing the paint and just leave. Roby, when he was trying to drive to the paint, so they knew that the Thunder couldn't hit outside shots, so they did what every smart team would do, and they just packed the paint. And that really seems to be bothering SGA recently. He can't really seem to get out of his own head. And unfortunately tonight, Lou was in a similar headspace. Like I said, a wide open 3-point shot that ends up barely nicking the far side of the rim. It's just weird, really weird. Like, that's hard to even do. That's how bad of a shot it was. Like, it would have looked better if it was an air ball, I think. It's just weird stuff from both SGA and Lou. Defensively, Lou's always going to hustle, but he got 3 quick fouls there in the first half, and that just kind of hampered, I think, his defensive production in the second half as well. And Shai just had another one of those games where he was lackadaisical and didn't really seem to care. I think the I don't have stats. Again, just these post games are supposed to be shorter, and I don't want to stay up all night digging into these before I start recording. But it seemed like whenever Shea was on the floor, it wasn't a coincidence that the Rockets were pushing the pace, and you often saw Shea trailing offensive players, driving to the rim, Shea behind him, just kind of standing there, right, waiting for the ball to be passed back in so he could take it down the other side of the floor. The Thunder did not push the ball well in transition, and I have to blame SGA and Giddey there a little bit for that, right, as being the primary ball handlers and playmakers. This team, I keep harping about this. I said it last season. I keep saying it this season. This team is at their best when they're pushing the ball in transition, and not necessarily fast break points, right? You still push the ball in transition. That leads from our opportunities for you to be able to drive and attack, kick out to open shooters, etc. The Thunder did not do a great job at that at all tonight. Meanwhile, the Rockets kind of went on their run there in the second half because they were doing that. They were doing that same exact thing. That's why they started hitting some of those shots in the third quarter from outside and had some open shots. That's why they were finishing around the rim, throwing up lobs to Christian Wood. And I get that Shea and Giddey and Lou maybe didn't have a interior presence. Well, even then, it doesn't really matter because they're essentially still playing their same five starters. So all that to say, I thought Shea and Lou did not have their best games on either end of the floor. Although it was good to see Shea be a little more efficient, he still just seems to be in his own head. He's really struggling with some of these defenses, as well as I think just like trying to balance setting up teammates, playing alongside Giddey, for example, and trying to get others involved. I know the coaching staff are really trying to push that on him and help him become a better playmaker this season. He seems to kind of be struggling with balancing all of that. Again, not a long-term concern, but I am ready to selfishly just ready to see another 30 plus point game from Shea, see him be a little more assertive on the offensive end. I mentioned Giddey. Giddey was a negative tonight, unfortunately. He did have 5 points and 5 rebounds and 7 assists, which is great and just shows you that even when he's not scoring the ball, how impactful he can be, even when it is a quote-unquote down night for the rookie. That's really impressive. But only 2 points, 1 of 9 from the floor. 5 of those shots were from 3. I keep talking about that. When teams like the Rockets are packing the paint excessively and Giddey isn't able to drive to the rim as much, he's obviously he's having more opportunities to shoot because they're leaving him open. And that's fine. I think 3 attempts per game is good for Giddey, but a lot of work still. that outside shot still leaves a lot to be desired. It'll come along, but it unfortunately might not be a thing that happens until maybe like during the offseason when he's putting on more size and strength, especially that leg strength that I keep talking about. And again, the fact that he only had 2 points or why does that say? Oh yeah, I had it scrolled over on the box score and it just had an S, and I was like, why are steals in front of rebounds and assists? 2 points for Josh Giddey, not steals, unfortunately. We can look at his steals. He had 1 steal and 2 fouls. Just regardless, Giddey really seemed to struggle tonight, and it was uncharacteristic of him after what we've seen over the past week. Just something to notice. And this is something that Jacob presented, a question that he presented to Justin and I last night on our weekly group podcast. Does Giddey struggle playing alongside SGA? Was he playing better last week because SGA wasn't playing alongside him? I think that's a fair point because that is more of his natural position, being a true point guard. And he doesn't feel, I used the term burden on yesterday's podcast. It's almost a burden, that feeling of having to try and incorporate and play alongside Shea compared to when he's out, just being able to play his own game. But tonight, Giddey got some opportunity to play with some of those bench players and still just continued to have those same struggles. It just was an off night for Giddey. Nate Sanders just asked how many minutes for Giddey. Giddey played 24 minutes, which was, the third most behind Lou and SGA of the starters. However, Isaiah Roby played 26 and Trey Mann played 30, which I think is about perfect. I think that was obviously I want to see Giddey get more than Isaiah Roby and Trey Mann moving forward. But for a game like tonight, I think that makes sense, especially when he was struggling like he was. And that's a good point, Nate. I think that just kind of drives home the point that Giddey, unfortunately, was not one of the better players for the Thunder tonight. And that's why we saw guys like Roby and Trey Mann get more minutes there. Just something to keep an eye on with that SGA matchup. I still haven't looked at those on-off numbers. I probably need to do that if I want to keep bringing that up. But again, it's going to be a growth, a learning experience for those two, and hopefully they kind of get it going here into the second half of the season, as we're about a quarter of the way through. Thunder 3-point shooting just continues to be absolutely terrible. No questions about it. Again, just kind of like the lack of true bigs, the lack of rim protection heading into the season, how we always talked about that was kind of by design from Sam Presti. The 3-point shooting in a way is, but there's guys on this team I think that they're hoping that they can develop to become better 3-point shooters. But 7 of 43 3-point attempts, and you only hit 7 of those. That's 16% from the floor. For example, for comparison, Rockets weren't a ton better. They shot 46, only 3 more threes, and made, I guess, 8 more than their 15 of 46. Just 7 of 40. That's horrendous. There's not much more to say about that. It just needs to be mentioned. And the Thunder had wide open attempts. They just could not capitalize on that. Off those, I understand that Mike Muscala is the best 3-point shooter, and Kinrich Williams, who has been really good from 3 this season, I believe in the 40%. But like JRE, I think he leads all rookies in 3-point percentage. He was 0-4 from 3 tonight. Just Bazley 0-4, Lou 1 of 6, Shea 2 of 5, Giddey 0 of 5. Are there any more ridiculous ones? Oh, Trey Mann, as great of a game that he had, it was only 1 of 5 from 3. So just something they really, really need to focus on, especially heading into future seasons. But it is a little frustrating to see them shoot that poorly from the 3-point line, whether they're trying to win or not. Bazley, again, it maybe is unfair to continue to harp on Bazley. I talked a lot about him on Monday, talked a lot about him on the podcast. But again, my co-host Jacob had another pretty great stat worth mentioning about Bazley and how poor he truly has been playing in the last 9 games, including tonight's game versus the Rockets. Bazley is 19 of 81, 23% from the field, and 7 of 32 from 3, 22%. Jacob mentioned the nice 5-game stretch he had earlier in the season, but he's fallen off a cliff. And this is I think the real dagger here. He got subbed out tonight with 7:47 left in the third and never returned. And keep in mind, Bazley was one of the few Thunder bigs that the Thunder had available tonight, and Dagnall still took him out there. Dagnall kind of mentioned him a little bit post-game when he was, or sorry, I keep saying post-game, pre-game, his availability when he was asked about Bazley, and he kind of mentioned the same thing that all of us have been talking about. Yes, his defense has been really impressive. He's being asked to do maybe a little more than, to expand out of his comfort zone. If he can get it going offensively, how exciting that would be. He's playing good defense, yada, yada, yada. He was just off against the Houston Rockets. Like, this team, Bazley should have contributed so much more in the offensive end of the floor than he did. He had a 3-point shot to start the third quarter that I was texting with Jacob. It looked like a baseball pitcher, like a curveball or a knuckleball. Like, he's shooting it. It starts to go straight. It kind of curves off to the right, and it's just a brick. And then he airballs a layup, start the record. Just stuff like that. And you feel bad for him to a certain extent. But when you have a guy like Isaiah Roby, who's been out of the rotation, putting up 17 points, 5 rebounds, doing what he's supposed to be doing, playing equally good defense, I would argue. Look, I understand using the season as a baseline, especially for a player like Bazley, to see what you have in him. But there's no reason that Roby shouldn't be getting or digging into some of those Bazley minutes. And that's just something I wanted to mention there. We won't dive into Bazley much more because I've talked a lot about him. JRE struggled, just briefly, I'll mention him. He's been so great recently for this team, but only 2 points, 7 rebounds, 1 of 6 shooting. Wasn't great. He didn't have one of his better games. And the Thunder defense, like I said, it was good at times, but just seemed like a lack of effort compared to this Thunder defense we've become accustomed to. But enough of the negatives. I spent way too much time on those. 2 positives tonight to round off the podcast. Isaiah Roby. I mentioned it. Should he get Bazley minutes? He looked really solid tonight, and I think there was a really solid quote from Dagnall tonight to kind of drive that home, if I can find it. Here it is. With the way Isaiah Roby played tonight, Dagnall says it puts a lot of pressure on us to try and find cracks for him. And what Dagnall's referring to, obviously, is Isaiah's been out of the rotation. And so what are ways that they can kind of, and I understand that, Roby doesn't really seem like a player that would be sticking around long term, and you want to prioritize development for some of these other players. Like I said, I understand what they're doing with Bazley this season, just seeing what they have in him, seeing if he can figure it out so they can make the right and correct decision in regards to should they offer him that rookie extension or not coming this offseason, excuse me. But man, watching the way Roby played, he got to close the game, like I mentioned, with SGA, Lou, Giddey. He's more of a lob threat than a lot of those other bigs are in this team, which I think is huge for players like Giddey and Shea. I think it's beneficial to their development to have a player like Roby on the floor compared to Darius Bazley. I think that's a very fair argument to make, and I think their development collectively, the Trey Mans, the Giddey, the SGA, is more important combined than the individual development of Darius Bazley at this point. And maybe that's unfair of me to say, but I truly don't think so. I'm going to make the argument that I think Roby should be getting not all of Baisley's minutes, maybe not start instead of Baisley, but I'd like to see a lineup of or have become the starters, and SGA, Giddy, Lou, um, JRE, and Roby. JRE Roby is the two bigs, right? Instead of Baisley, who's been starting in that position. So all that to say, I thought Roby played a really good game. Like I said, 17 points, 8 of 10 from the floor. Only attempted 2 threes when he was open, which is fine. He was 1 of 2 from 3. Thought he played solid defense, especially against Christian Wood. Was one of the few bigs that had any sort of success really against Christian Wood, who just dominated the Thunder down low. I thought Roby played a really good game, and he's absolutely a positive tonight. Hopefully he gets some more minutes, like Dignault mentioned in that quote. Then the other ones are a guy that we've been harping on a lot here at the Uncontested, really ever since he's been drafted. He started we were intrigued with his potential, and he's like quickly been winning over all of us, all Thunder fans as a whole. Trey Mann, 17 points, a career high, 7 rebounds, which is huge. That's a career high. 5 of 12 from the floor, only 1 of 5 from 3, but he was 6 of 6 from the free throw line, which is incredibly exciting. 30 minutes, which actually is the second most behind anybody other than Shea, mainly because he played with all those bench lineups and also got to close the game. But still, just some really impressive 2 steals, 2 fouls, which I love. I think that just shows how aggressive Trey was tonight. We keep talking about how Daignault mentioned they sent Trey down to the blue to really kind of work on that defense. They knew he could create his own shot. They knew he was going to be an offensive threat, but he really needed to improve on his defense and be able to learn how to utilize his size that he has. I think Trey, I can click on it right here, 6'3" as a shooting guard. Right? They actually have him listed as a point guard on CBS. That's weird. Gosh, crazy dogs. Brody's really fired up about Trey Mann as well. Anyways, I thought Trey continues to really impress. I saw a lot of tweets from Royce Young, Andrew Schlecht, some of our guys, Jacob, continue to talk about, I mentioned his defense, but also it seems like the game is slowing down for him on the offensive end as well. He's not just trying to do what he did early on in the season where he's going for that step back move, trying to create space and get the three, because he knows that he can kind of do that. He's very gifted and talented at that, those long legs, the powerful steps, and the quickness, right, to be able to create space for him to get that 3-point shot off. But again, six free throw attempts, knocking down all 6, which is awesome. But we saw him driving to the lane. I think of one play I think it was the second quarter, but I know for sure it was the first half, where he drove kind of down the right wing towards the basket. Instead of going up for a layup, he saw another Houston defender coming up on him. And so he kind of looped back around, right, up towards the other wing. He does a quick little hesitation crossover move in front of the defender for a wide open layup on the block. And that's just like such great court awareness. Something else, I'm continuing to notice him when he's driving. He's not just looking for his own now, or he's not just looking for like a quick pull up jump shot. He's also trying to create for others. Unfortunately, tonight, his teammates weren't doing that, allowing him or knocking down shots, giving him those assists. But I thought he's doing a better job at just court awareness as a whole, right? And we're seeing that as well with the 7 rebounds, seeing him be so aggressive. I thought that was incredibly impressive. Just his assertiveness, his decisiveness, and just his understanding of space is just so impressive. And how I keep talking about that, and Jacob talked a lot about it on yesterday's podcast, but his ability to create separation and create that space is really elite, right? And having 17 points, I think, was huge. This is a quote from Daignault about Mann's game tonight. He's coming along, gaining confidence. We've shuffled him back and forth with the blue by design. He's going to be able to score in the NBA, walking in the door. It's becoming a 2-way player. So I think what he's meaning there is, we want to continue to work on him with his defense. But again, that's been so much better on that end of the floor. I've been really, really impressed with him continuing to utilize his size and just the effort. And, again, I think we saw him have some really good defense possessions on Friday against Bradley Beal. We saw that a lot last week. Today, a little more tough, but I love the on-ball role he took on today with that second unit. And just a lot of exciting stuff to keep an eye on with Trey Mann, especially after a 30-point showing from him last week in the G League. So that's the last positive I have. Just going through questions. I already mentioned Nate's question. There was a question on Twitter. A giddy season. Thunder Guy 69 asks, are the Thunder going to be able to win without Kinrich or Mike playing? Getting blown out by the Rockets isn't a good look. Giddy season, I think this was a little bit of a little bit of an abnormality with the Thunder not playing their true style of basketball. Obviously, having Kinrich and Mike helps that a lot, but overall, I don't think we should be too worried. It's just another one of those fluke games playing in Houston. No need to be worried there. And I think that's it. I think that is all. So I appreciate y'all tuning in. We had a good crew here, especially for it being the game that it was. Wednesday coming up, they play the Rockets again, this time at home before they go on a little bit of a road stand. They play the Memphis Grizzlies on Thursday. Uncontested. We'll have you covered for all those games. Continue to stay tuned. And until next time, Thunder up.